Morning, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. We'll be starting in just a minute or two with the ringing of the bell, the concho. In the meanwhile, if you would like to offer incense, we have charcoal at the middle and the right incense burner. Please help yourself. Thank you very much. Oh, okay. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay. Okay. Wait when I go. Yeah, give me a minute. Okay. Very good. So the purpose of these services in August are twofold. One is to go ahead and provide an abbreviated service in which we can spend a minute or two talking about some of the rituals that we do, just for background, for general information, and then part of it will address etiquette at this particular temple. But the main thing is to go back and celebrate the teachings of the historical Buddha. Here at this temple, we love them. They're the foundation of the teachings that we follow. But the teachings that we follow are from the insights of a great sage, Shinran Shonin, and we focus more on his direct teachings, but Shinran Shonin himself considered himself a disciple of the Buddha and really appreciated these teachings. Some of you may have seen pictures of Shinran Shonin. He's often pictured with a white stole around his neck. That's because when he was training for 20 years or more at Mount Hiei, he was considered a scholar. He had read all of the Mahayana Sutras, which are voluminous, hundreds of works, several times. And he knew the Dharma so well and treasured these teachings. So today we'll focus on another of the foundational teachings of the historical Buddha. So I mentioned incense, so before we start the service formally with the ringing of the bell, the calling bell, which my good friend, Minister's Assistant Katie Sumida is going to help me with, I just wanted to mention that if you go to many Buddhist temples, when you go see the incense, you'll see it like it's in the little informal altar I created here. Sorry about that. But you'll see, or maybe you can see, there are 3 sticks standing upright. And this is very common in Buddhist temples. Sometimes it's a pure stick of incense, sometimes it's a joss stick with a little broom straw maybe that the incense is put around. In our tradition, we sometimes use stick incense, but we lie it flat. So I'm now going to go ahead and make that adjustment. And what we do instead is to more typically, unless it's at home or something, we very often light a charcoal and then sprinkle some powdered incense, which is the incense in its purest form. It's still in the wood form, the resinous wood that has that beautiful scent. So it's a lovely way to do it as well. But since this is an introductory type service, I will go ahead and let you know that the offering to the Buddha is not the smoke. The offering to the Buddha is our purified mind. So we light the incense, we bow in front of the incense, so that we can present a purified mind to the Buddha. And technically, at least practically I should say, all that means is that we are preparing ourselves to hear the teachings of the Buddha without making judgments immediately. Ordinarily, we're quick to make judgments about what we think is the right way or the wrong way. The Buddha only asked people to listen with an open mind, and then when they get home, or in a moment of reflection when they can go ahead and do so uninterrupted, decide, well, how's that sound? Is that something that works with my experience? Is it something that might help me? And I've said earlier that the Buddha was unique among the world's great religious teachers because he said that if you find a teaching that helps you, that's great. Keep it. He did not say, follow the teaching regardless. In other words, already you can see in our tradition that there is an outreach to the individual to allow the individual to come to the Buddha, not having to go ahead and contort themselves in some way that feels unnatural, but just come to the Buddha. So at this time I'm going to ask my friend Katie to go ahead and ring the concho bell, and go ahead and put your hands together in Gasho and listen to the bell as a kind of meditation. So in Gasho, 2 hands together, 1 hand is you, 1 hand is the Buddha. Thank you. Please join me in reciting Amida's name. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Das. So thanks. I know some of you have been coming to all of the introductory services, so that's great. I really appreciate it. I think it's nice to go back to the source of many of the Buddhist teachings, if nothing else than to gain an appreciation for, if you're active in our tradition, for where some of our impulses, some of our culture comes from. Earlier in the first episode or first session, I identified 2 things that I thought were important and are not always brought forward, that actually occurred before the Buddha was enlightened, or existed before the Buddha was enlightened. Most of the things that you read will go ahead and recount the sutra that talks about the Buddha's first discourse with his former colleagues who became his disciples. But these 2 things predate that, at least in time, in the story, rather than the presentation maybe. One of them is ahimsa, first do no harm. And to me that explains a lot of the character of Buddhism. And I hastened to add then, and do so now, that that was a unique principle that was not unique to Buddhism. It was shared among all of the great Indic religions of the time. Hinduism, Jain, some of the Vedic teachings before the consolidation into Hinduism. And it's a good principle to have. It just means that you have to be really thoughtful because a lot of times you don't know how what you say might cause harm. The other teaching was the middle way. And I also shared with you the fact that for centuries Buddhism was called the middle way. The people, ordinary people, thought that was the most important teaching that the Buddha had come up with. And then we described the teaching of the middle way, the incident that let it come, and it was discussed in that first turning of the wheel of Dharma that we talked about after the Buddha became awakened and after some reflection decided, now that I have this great understanding and this great bliss, I probably should share it with others. And so he did so with his former colleagues who had been studying with him in the forest doing difficult ascetic practices. And then in the second session, we did two things you'll always find in descriptions of basic Buddhism. One was the Four Noble Truths, and the other was the Three Poisons. And we identified how you can take a look at the Four Noble Truths as a protection against these human conditions of the three poisons: anger, greed, ignorance. We even suggested that the present moment is our one time when we can deal with these three poisons, in the sense that we can begin to understand our own ignorance that might lead us to have acted out because of something that happened in the past, or been inappropriate because of something we want in the future. The Buddha, as most of you know, is often quoted as talking about living in the present moment, although there are teachings that encourage us to focus on the past and the future. But in general, that's true. Because if you see that you get quick to anger, the best time to deal with it is when you're not angry. So take a look at what triggers you, because those conditions will come back again, or something similar. So how can I, as an ordinary foolish person, deal with such things? Maybe you can be sensitive to when anger might arise, and you can even sense, okay, this is a danger area. This is what set me off last time. Can you be more balanced this time? And likewise, the same thing applies to greed, which I associated with the future more than the past or present. But today we're going to go ahead and continue with what the Buddha's fourth noble truth was. I encouraged everyone to think of the fourth noble truth in a general way, which was the spiritual way, or the spiritual life. That's why we come to temple. That's why if we find a temple we like, we support the temple so that we can have nice teachings there. Because it helps us develop our own spirituality in some dimension. We don't walk in and ignorant and walk out Buddhas, but we walk in ignorant and walk out more appreciative of how deep our ignorance might go, but also that there are ways in which we can begin to deal with that ignorance. But specifically, the Eightfold Noble Path, as is said in the name, has 8 components. I'm going to encourage you to think of them as 8 dimensions of spirituality. Now that's how we tend to treat them in Jodo Shinshu. In that first sermon from the Buddha, the first discourse, he had very specific advice for the fellow ascetics and monastics who were with him about what they needed to do. Very specific monastic practices to help develop their capabilities in each of those 8 dimensions that are not practical for folks like you and me. Most of us work for a living, or if we're retired, we find our lives delightfully full, of friends and family. And as some of you know who retired, once your time is unstructured, it's even harder to find free time, not easier, because you're always able to help somebody out or go see somebody. But for our lives today, there's very valuable ideas in the Eightfold Noble Truths. The Eightfold Noble Path. So let me go ahead and rattle them off. Views, thought, speech, conduct, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, meditation. As abstractions, these would sound great in any religion. But there is a Buddhistic approach towards them all. The one I'd like to spend a bit of time with is right views, because in street language we'd want to get our heads screwed on straight before we got too deep into Buddhism. And the Buddha had very specific ideas what a right view was. And as I earlier explained last session, right in this case doesn't mean right or wrong, it means appropriate. So what are the appropriate views for the spiritual life? Well, the Buddha identified what were not right views, because in most cases, people of his time thought that their life was determined, or if it had meaning at all, it was for several reasons, or it was completely chaotic. So the first view that the Buddha thought was a wrong one was that our future is fated. So some of you know the word kismet. This is like kismet, or karma with a capital K, I guess, where it doesn't matter what you try and do. You were going to meet this person, fall in love with this person, get married, have children, or you were going to go ahead and open a business and be cheated by this person. There was nothing you could do. It was fate with a capital F. The Buddha disagreed with this approach entirely, even though there are teachings about karma, which we alluded to last week, but we can talk very briefly about today. But karma does not mean that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. It does not mean, in Japanese slang they'd probably say bachi, you get what you deserve if you act out. Karma is entirely different. Karma are causes and conditions, and if you look back on your life, some of the things that led you to where you are right now were causes and conditions, some of which you are aware of. You're not aware of all of them, but some of which you're aware of. But it's not the case that you have no free will, or you only have the illusion of free will. You have been conditioned. There have been causes that affected how you make a decision. But finally, to a person who is more awake, you have control. The very liberating idea against the deep, dark contrast of fatalism. Another one that we're very familiar with is the idea that the gods ruled us. We had no ability to make decisions by ourselves to significantly affect our future. It was all up to the gods, and therefore we needed to honor the gods. We needed to placate the gods. We needed to make donations to the gods. We needed to act in accordance with holy teachings so that we did not anger the gods. Most of you know Hinduism has a big pantheon of different gods and goddesses, and there are also demigods, angelic beings, etc. So it's a large group, and depending on your situation, you might have to be keeping a lot of gods happy, just so that something will come out the way that you would like. And this is no slam or offense to Christianity, but many Christians who have a superficial understanding of prayer believe that something similar is at work. That if they go ahead and live a good life, and then they ask God for certain things to happen, that they're more likely to do so. I'm saying superficially, and I don't want to go ahead and hoe in another garden right now, but I will say, I'll restrict myself to this comment, that if you go down to what early Christians thought of as prayer, it was a lot like meditation. It was to lessen the will, not to fulfill the will of the individual. And that's why you'll read phrases like that in early prayer, the goal was to ally your will with the will of God. You see this reflected more specifically today in Islam than in Christianity, but it's getting to the same idea. So in some ways, it's the opposite. It's not that we are partners with God, or we get to go ahead and barter with God, or play to God's vanity or his emotions or her emotions, but rather that we are free to go ahead and still control our future, our fate. And then the third, what the Buddha would think of as a wrong view, is simply that it doesn't matter. So in philosophy, they might call this well, let me back up for a second. Those of us who read in Buddhism are impressed by the fact that the first sutras that got translated into European languages tended to be the ones that focused on nothingness. So Western professors, especially in Germany, where they were very good students, determined that the Buddhism was a nihilistic religion. And nihilism was the word that I went up on a moment ago. That is, that nothing matters. Because if the universe is empty, and especially seen from a tradition where you're looking at a different view of the universe, where the universe is populated by God as well as mere humans, it seemed like that was the only answer. Later on, the understanding in the West got much better about Buddhism. Among other things, they found all kinds of other sutras that did not focus on nothingness. But there was some recognition, I believe, that there are values within Buddhism that transcend the concept of nothingness. And some of you who are students of Buddhism know that when the sutras talk about nothingness, emptiness, things are empty, we're encouraged to see. Well, first off, it's physically correct, I'll get to that in a minute, but that things are empty as we encounter them because they're empty of independent origination. In other words, the Buddha always asked people, well, how did that come about? So these physical objects in our life came about for very certain reasons. They do not have independent creation. They didn't just show up complete and perfect in their current apparition, their current presentation. Instead, there were causes and conditions that led to them. And then I did say, for those of you who are physicists, you know that there is some truth in Buddhism, because this wooden lectern, I'm very happy it's wood and not plastic, sounds nice and solid. Whether it's wood or plastic, there is a lot more empty space here than matter. What we have instead are atoms with a great deal of distance between other atoms and subatomic particles, and mostly it's space. Or for that matter, if some of you have looked at photos of microphotography, where they really blow things up 1,000-fold, for example, you begin to get a sense that things are not quite what they seem, because this seems like a nice, smooth, flat surface. If you looked at it closely enough, it would be filled with peaks and valleys, just like the wilderness. And moreover, it would be empty as far as space goes. There's some suggestion that our physical world is a lot like outer space in terms of the relationship of stars and planets and the vast emptiness of space. So anyway, those are the three things that the Buddha warned against. He did encourage folks to feel like they were enabled. Some of you know that India then, and there's still a shadow of this in present-day India, was a world of castes, the caste system. So that it kind of helped create, it was a social order, maybe there was some benefit to it, but it was very stultifying to individuals, because if you belong to the lowest caste, the untouchables, it's because you deserved to be. Obviously you'd done something evil in the past, so you had to be content with living out your sentence by being at the bottom of the social structure, being able to be bossed by anyone, robbed of whatever little money you might have. But the Buddha was a radical spiritual teacher, just like many of the other great world teachers, world religious teachers, because he said that nobility depends not on who your parents were, but on how you behave. So he focused on ethical behavior. And in that way, it was ennobling to the individuals. And in his followers, he accepted people of all castes. He wasn't an easy person, because he would always interview potential disciples and find out where else they studied and where their head was at. But when he accepted someone, it was without recognition, it was without causation of how good or poor a background they had. So view is a really important thing, and that's why often Buddhist sermons, even in this temple, will try and help us see things in a certain way, because it's useful. You probably know people, you may have friends who are very paranoid in their worldview. Everyone's out to get them. It's a zero-sum game. They expect to be cheated and complain about it. That's a sad place to be. And in some ways it's influenced by nihilism, by fatalism. As Buddhists, we're encouraged to deal with the upsets and keep going. So if we get mistreated, if someone slights us, if someone insults us, we take that under advisement. We think about it to try and find causes and conditions for it. So all of the language about right views comes down to the fact that the Buddha is enabling us to go ahead and live a life of more freedom, one that can help other people benefit as well. I'm going to go quickly over thought, speech, and action, because we touched on it in an earlier session, but there is an important karmic link for the Buddha, that if you think good of people, or at least you think good things about people, it's better for you. I mean, I'm sure it's better for the other person too, but it's better for you, because then you're less likely to say something that's insulting, to cause harm. Or if you find yourself saying unpleasant things, maybe you didn't think that they would even come out of your mouth, you get the chance to see those and you hope to be able to stop your speech before you say it. Because the Buddha also understood that when somebody is acting out, when somebody decides to haul off and smack somebody to get in a fight easily, it's probably been preceded by bad speech. You know, muttering under your breath or insulting another person to their face is preparatory to actually acting out. So if you see the benefit in a life of peace, I'm not saying it's an easy life, but if you have a tendency towards that, then the Buddha's encouraging us, well, you can improve on your work in that area by focusing on your thoughts. Just encourage yourself to think good thoughts. If you find yourself thinking bad thoughts about a person, just acknowledge it. Okay, that's all right. And then if you're upset with somebody because the way they acted, you have to go ahead and take a slightly broader view. Well, I don't know what that person went through right before they called me a bad name. I don't know what trouble they're going through. I'll be more careful in the future not to set them off. But then you drop any annoyance, any anger, any attachment to that bad interaction. So, thought, speech, action. We have a beautiful saying in our tradition. I believe it comes from the Hawaii mission, but it goes this way. I will think pure and beautiful thoughts. I will say pure and beautiful words. I will do pure and beautiful deeds. So that's not just a lovely saying. It's built on the Buddha's insight of the karmic links between thought, speech, and action. It's an ideal. We don't hold people to it. We don't question them when they leave the temple. Okay, now, are you thinking good thoughts? You know, are you saying good things? Are you avoiding bad actions? It's up to us to go ahead and focus on those things when we begin to understand that in our own ways we're ignorant people. Livelihood was important to the Buddha. It was thought that there were some professions that were not conducive to a spiritual life. That was a double-edged sword in some ways because it did lead to later persecution of people in India, persecution of people in Japan because they worked in a profession that was considered unseemly. Leather workers, butchers, armorers, even soldiers in some cases. I just wanted to add that the Buddha had a more complex understanding of armies because he, until he went on his spiritual quest, he was sort of the head of the army for his little principality, Kapilavastu. And the same can be said for the Dalai Lama, who was not, when Tibet was pure and before overrun by the Chinese, he was not the person who was considered the spiritual expert. He actually was an administrator, and one of his jobs was to lead the army in Tibet. Now you can say he did a bad job because he couldn't protect against the Chinese, but you have to admit they were kind of outnumbered. But in any event, a mistake, I believe, in the 1960s of protests was that the soldier at the lowest level was being criticized as much as the citizens at the top level who would make decisions about where to send troops and send them right in harm's way, send them into conflict. Just something to think about. But most of us, I think, just selfishly like to get to a profession that's pleasant. Some of those professions I mentioned were not so pleasant. But from the Buddhist point of view, and the Buddha understood most of us have to work for a living, he thought, well, you get to make a choice. Why don't you find something that is conducive? I did a lot of jobs in my life. I finally ended up in a kind of publishing career, and everything I did after I retired from the main publisher, I had 2 other jobs, but they were publishing related. So it was good for me. I was very grateful for that. So beyond livelihood, there's effort. This is common sense in a way. If you're serious about a spiritual life, then you don't give up on it. You don't say, okay, 2 weeks are gone, you know, I think I've just about nailed it. My life is so much better now. I'm not angry anymore. Good things are coming my way. I've got this made. The Buddha would consider that to be an unlearned or an unreasoned view, because things keep happening, things change. Things go our way for a while, and then they don't go our way for a while. But in a spiritual life, we continue, we persevere. Some people who learn about our recitation of the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, do so thinking that it is always done out of gratitude. And that's true. It is an expression of deep gratitude doctrinally for the teachings of the Amida Buddha, which get into the details of how it is that because of Amida Buddha, even ignorant people have the potential to become a Buddha. But in actual practice in Japan and other Pure Land countries, the recitation of Amida's name is for any change, any upset. Not just good fortune, but bad fortune too. And I don't know if it's so common now, but back when Joyce and I started at the temple, we had even some Issei first generation folks from Japan and second generation. The Nisei would tell us that they would often hear their parents off in another room saying Namo Amida Butsu, because that's how you dealt with the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, to steal a line. To deal with bad things that happen too. Because ideally when you recite the Nembutsu for our purposes, you're able to begin to share a little bit of the Buddha's mind. Buddha in mind, Nembutsu. And it's not that we suddenly become Buddhas ourselves, and it's not that we are fooling ourselves, but we're awakening to the potential of what it might be like to have deeper understanding, wisdom, and compassion. So there is a minister in the Buddhist Churches of America who he came to San Diego one time, and he said that Namo Amida Butsu is, wow, incredible. Just an expression like that. Unbelievable. That can be good, it can be bad. And the spiritual response is the same. Mindfulness and meditation are almost commodities in the United States right now. You can go to take business classes that claim to teach you mindfulness for business. You can take classes for meditation that's supposed to make you a better golfer or a better business person or whatever. But for us, as a spiritual practice, there's something we should be doing every day. Not that we have the luxury always to slow things down and live through each incident in our lives, to understand them completely as they're happening, but we are able to bring a spark of awareness to the marketplace, to see things maybe with one step away, one remove, a little bit of distance. I'm reminded of an Asian proverb, and this one did not come from China, but it's understood in Japan and other countries in Asia. To get out of the game, I'm sorry, I already blew the punchline. To see the game, get out of it. To see the game, get out of it. So reciting the Nembutsu is a way to get out of the game a little bit and see it a little bit. So mindfulness is not, or does not have to be, a heavy-duty, full-time investment where you're so busy being mindful that you can barely keep up with everything else. But it does mean we can have that little bit of perspective, that remove, that distance gives us a little bit of perspective. So even if mindfulness is not, in this case, tied to a very detailed level of ritual and other practices recommended by the Buddha for monastics and ascetics, it's really useful for us. And meditation in Jodo Shinshu has a history of sorts, but a way to understand meditation right now is first off to recognize that just as in Zen meditation, which is a mind-body practice, the things we do here at the temple are mind-body practices too. So those of us who recite the Nembutsu will approach the shrine, will bow, will have offered incense. Those are not empty rituals just to get done because they have to be done. They're meant to be done in the deepest meditational way, body and mind. So when we bow to the shrine and the representation of Amida Buddha, often a statue, sometimes a scroll, sometimes the actual Chinese characters of Namo Amida Butsu. When we bow, we're opening up ourselves. We're ready to receive the benefit of coming to the temple. We're able to share, even if in a small way, the mind of Amida Buddha. So there is a tradition in our school of Buddhism, especially in Buddhist Churches of America, which is the Japanese-based, that there is no practice in our tradition. And sometimes meditation schools are identified as a kind of straw dog, or straw man, that is a practice that we do not ascribe to because it involves the ego too much. And there probably is some truth to that. And for a long time, temples in our tradition did not offer meditation that much. If we have meditations in a service, they're about a minute long. And if they go longer than that, people get antsy. They're expecting to hear a bell after that, or a saying or something. But the attitude in our tradition today is much broader. I know why it's broad. It's seen as acceptable from many in the community, is that because it's beneficial. And it's possible to go ahead and do meditation in a less, talking formal meditation, sitting meditation, where you count your breaths, etc. It's possible to do that in a way that does not rely on self-power, on how good you are, And you can go ahead and finish a meditation and not be proud of yourself, not saying, oh, okay, well, I'm doing really good, you know. I'm a better Buddhist than the other people. I did even better than they are. You don't have to do that. But the other thing I'll just mention is that if you dig deeper into most of the so-called self-power branches of Buddhism, it is the case that they know that too. Dogen Zenji, the head of Soto Zen, saved a practice for his very best students. He didn't do it for everybody. In Jodo Shinshu, we do these things for everybody. You don't have to be a special, accomplished person for these practices, but Dogen Zenji saved his best practice, he thought, for his best students, and that was called shikantaza, just sitting, not attempting to gain anything from the meditation, just existing, just being. That's closer to the idea of early Christian prayer, just existing. It's closer to what I encourage folks to consider if they're doing the Nembutsu themselves or seeing other people doing it. It's a way for us to exist, even if for a few seconds, without ego and the problems of ego. So what I just did was to go through the Eightfold Noble Path in a way that generalized it, but I hope made it more accessible and also aligned it with the practice that you would see at this temple. I use the word practice with a small p. It's what we do. If you're a sociologist looking at this temple, if you were Margaret Mead and we were out in Samoa and she came to see how we're dealing our services, she would call us a devotional temple, and she would say that our practice is this recitation that we do. Now, she may completely misinterpret why we do it or what's going on. She may see us bow and assume that we're petitioning the great god Amida. Rudyard Kipling, everyone has their own opinions about them, probably not so well known today, but on the road to Mandalay in his poem, he talked about the great god Bud, positioning him, the narrator of the poem, as an ignorant person seeing people bow in front of Buddha. Kipling was smarter than that, knew more about Buddhism than that, but he liked his characters, and so that was the character approach. But when we bow to the shrine, and sometimes it's abstracted, it's not even a human figure or a human-like figure as a statue or a scroll, but the words themselves of the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu. We're not asking for anything. We're expressing gratitude for the opportunity to share a little bit with Amida Buddha. So I hope that this introduction to some of the basics of Buddhism will be useful to you regardless of which school or sect of Buddhism you might end up with. But I especially hope it's useful to you in making sense of some of the things around here if you continue to come to services. Our next service will be a week from Sunday. We're taking Labor Day weekend off, and it'll be a regular service. It'll be much more elaborate. They'll be able to use the full Onaijin, the shrine up above. But for These last 3 Sundays, I've treasured the chance to be on the same level as the rest of you, to be able to go ahead and share, if useful, my understanding. Some of the things I've said are unique to me. In most cases, I was careful in saying so, but the Buddha liked skeptics. So if anything here doesn't make sense to you or doesn't sound right, check it out. Look it up. Wikipedia is not so bad these days on Buddhism. It was pretty bad about 20 years ago. But now so many people have gone to correct things and improve them that if you're interested in the intellectual side, the content side of Buddhism, that's certainly one way to go. Before we close, I'm going to go ahead and focus one last time on the 3 treasures of Buddhism, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and simply focus on Sangha. It's easy to study Buddhism and to appreciate Buddhism from books. And it's also true that that was the way in which more folks learned about Buddhism, as opposed to coming to a temple in a living tradition. But the Sangha is an equal treasure. It's as valuable, as important, as high as the fact there was such a person as the Buddha and of the wonderful teachings that the Buddha left us. Equal. Even in the Buddha's time, he recognized that. Because ultimately, we learn from each other. We are not independent. We're interdependent. And it's a way, if you're worried about having a big ego about your spiritual development, it's a great way to remain humble. Because people will call you on it, or they'll ask you questions to help you think things through and see things a different way. I will say that my first real Buddhist teachers, despite some very wonderful senseis, both in Zen and Shin, were my wife's parents, Fred and Ritsu Nabeta. Because they were everyday people who just lived the values of Buddhism. They had a small shrine in their house, and Joyce's mom, very traditional, would always put the evening, offer some of the rice from the evening up in the shrine, and then, which you're not supposed to do, she would ring the bell. But it was more than just empty ritual or habit. The way that they dealt with their family, the way they dealt with other people, just beautiful. Just beautiful. So they, in some ways, are my biggest inspirations, even though I've had the luxury of hearing wonderful teachers here in a life, most of my adult life at this temple. So I wish you something similar. I hope that you enjoy the coming Labor Day weekend. Do something fun. Spend time with friends or family. And if you're able, please come to our Sunday services starting September 7th. If you are interested in chanting as meditation, we do a 9 o'clock chanting as well. And we are busier than ever with activities, so if you want to know some of the things going on, just sign up for our email. That's the end of my commercial. But I really wanted to thank everyone for coming today. We'll go ahead and have one last recitation of the Nembutsu. I'm going to ask people to bow. Please join me. Hands together, one hand you, one hand Buddha. In the coolness of this space, where generations of Buddhists have worshipped, people with maybe even bigger problems than you and me have come to find peace. Let us find peace as well. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Butsu. So thank you, everyone. We have some light refreshments downstairs. Please join us for that. If you'd like to offer incense before you go, please do so. If you're new to this tradition and want a few tips on the etiquette of offering incense, I'll be here too. But I really appreciate your kind attention. Thank you.